Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week I am here to convince you all to sit down and watch a double feature. One of the reasons I like doing videos on YouTube about older movies is the amount of comments I get from people telling me that I inspire them to rewatch a movie or watch a movie for the first time. It's just really cool to me. And about 9 months ago, I released a video on 1993's The Three Musketeers. And when I did, there were a few comments I kept getting over and over again. The first is that I am terrible at pronouncing French names. Look, I'm a stupid American. I'm very sorry. But the other comments were about other Musketeer adaptations that people loved. The Richard Lester movies from the 70s were incredibly popular in the comments, and I did see those movies as a kid, but I haven't watched them since. And the other pairing was the two-part French adaptation starring Eva Green from 2023, which I did actually watch after releasing these videos, and I really enjoyed part 1, but I thought that part 2 was kind of a bummer and a bit of a letdown. But hands down, the movie that was talked about the most when I released my video on The Three Musketeers, The Man in the Iron Mask. And so a few months later, I decided to cover that movie as well, and I had a great time doing it, and it convinced me all the more that The Three Musketeers and The Man in the Iron Mask make a really excellent double feature. And they really do almost play as soft sequels to one another, but Musketeers was produced by Disney and Iron Mask by MGM, so they are not officially sequels, but if we use our imaginations, I really do think that these two work well together, even though there are a few threads that don't quite match up, specifically D'Artagnan's relationship with the Queen in Iron Mask, but both movies do a great job of tackling the swashbuckling fun of the Musketeers world, while also treating the source material seriously and not poking fun at it. I will say, neither movie is a particularly faithful adaptation, but in my opinion, they still both fully work as movies. And before we go any further, I do just want to flag to all of you that from here on out, this is going to be a compilation video of my takes on both The Three Musketeers and The Man in the Iron Mask. Hello and welcome back everyone, I'm Brandon, this is Born to Rant, and today we are here to talk about a movie that captures the essence of its source material while completely ignoring most of its story, and a movie that gave us one of, if not the best, soft rock soundtrack ballads of the entire decade.
Let's make it all fun, all for love.
Starring Chris O'Donnell, Charlie Sheen, Oliver Platt, Kiefer Sutherland, and Tim Curry, The Three Musketeers was a movie that I was fully obsessed with as a kid. So much so that I made my mom make me a Three Musketeers sweatshirt inspired by the tunics they wear in this movie. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of it, so here's a cute picture of my dog instead. But seriously, this was a movie that I owned on VHS as a kid and would watch on repeat. It had everything I wanted from a movie as a kid. Sword fights, explosions, good guys that were funny, tough, and fun to root for, a lot of costuming that would catch the eye, and even a couple of moments that made me feel just a little scared. And in revisiting this movie, I was really surprised by what things still worked and held up and what things didn't. For example, I think this movie looks absolutely incredible. Cinematographer Dean Semler makes this movie feel like a painting come to life. This shot in particular is one I wanted to call out early on because, I mean, just look at it. It literally looks like a painting, and it's not the only shot in this movie to look this pretty. But before we get too deep into me waxing over how great this movie is, let's go back and talk about how this movie came to be and how it was received by audiences in 1993. Apologies for interrupting, but I wanted to jump in and just give you all a quick reminder that Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I use absolutely no AI in the making of my videos, and if that means anything to you at all, I would really appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you could possibly know. Interestingly enough, the production for this movie begins with a lawsuit. Seriously. Disney and Columbia were separately developing adaptations of Alexander Dumas's novel from 1844. And in 1992, Disney purchased a screenplay for The Three Musketeers from David Loughrey for $650,000. But the thing is, Loughrey was originally hired to write the script for Columbia. So this led to Columbia producer Brad Wyman accusing Disney of stealing Columbia's IP, and then he sued them for it. And the matter was then settled out of court, so who knows how it all ended up shaking out. But Columbia went ahead and canceled their version of the movie, so Disney got straight to work and brought on Stephen Herrick to direct. He was coming off of a fairly crazy first 4 movie run of Critters, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, and The Mighty Ducks. which makes him kind of an interesting choice for this movie, right? Coming off the back of doing 4 movies that I would broadly call comedies. For his big follow-up to The Mighty Ducks, Disney gave him the reins to an old-school action-adventure movie with sword fighting and carriage chases. And honestly, I think he did a pretty good job with this movie as far as directing it goes. But then again, he was working with Dean Semler, who's no slouch when it comes to shooting action, having already done Oscar-winning work on Dances with Wolves 2 years earlier. He also shot The Road Warrior and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and even had already worked with both Charlie Sheen and Kiefer Sutherland on both of the Young Guns movies. So even though Herrick didn't quite have the action directing experience, he was teamed up with a guy who'd been shooting amazing action sequences for well over a decade. Okay, let's get back to talking about how the production of The Three Musketeers came to be. As for the casting process of this movie, it sounds like it was very messy and kind of confusing. For example, Disney originally really wanted Charlie Sheen to play Porthos, but he would then go on to play Aramis, and Oliver Platt would play Porthos. Brad Pitt, Stephen Dorff, and Brendan Fraser all turned down the role of D'Artagnan, so Disney went with Chris O'Donnell, who was fresh off of back-to-back hits School Ties and Scent of a Woman. And then the cast was rounded out with Sutherland, Rebecca De Mornay, Michael Wincott, and Tim Curry as Cardinal Richelieu. And with that, they were off to make the movie. So, with a budget of $30 million, cameras started rolling on April 26, 1993, with the movie primarily shooting in Austria. Actually, it's shot in the town where Rebecca De Mornay grew up and went to high school, and that's just like the ultimate power move. And my favorite little behind-the-scenes factoid I found while doing research for this video is that O'Donnell, Sutherland, and Platt all did 2 full months of fencing and horseback riding training to prep for this movie, but Charlie Sheen had to miss out because he was too busy filming Hot Shots Part 2. And knowing this now when I watch this movie, it's so obvious. Sheen is almost never using his sword and is almost always disguising himself and then punching people. Seriously, it happens multiple times in this movie. So then in September of 1993, Disney did one of the most Disney things that's ever Disneyed and announced publicly that early test screenings of The Three Musketeers had the most positive responses they'd ever received for a live action movie, which of course caused the excitement and hype around this movie to soar. But then 2 months later, the movie came out and people did not really like it. It currently has a 30% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Not that Rotten Tomatoes or critical reception is the end-all be-all of if a movie is good or not. It's just an interesting metric to mention and look at so we can understand the context of how the movie was received when it was first released. And my favorite part about the reception for this movie is that Leonard Maltin kept calling it Young Swords because of the reteaming of Charlie Sheen, Kiefer Sutherland, and Dean Semler. But I think if he was really clever, he would have gone with making fun of the reteaming of Sutherland and Platt and called it the Three Flatliners or something. Get it? Because this movie was dead on a... You know what? It doesn't matter. Moving on. The movie was released on November 12th, 1993, and it did pretty well, placing first at the box office on its opening weekend and making $10.6 million against its $30 million budget, before going on to make a worldwide total of $111 million. Okay, one final thing before we dive into what makes this movie awesome and talk about its legacy, we have to talk about All for Love. All for Love was written specifically for this movie by Mutt Lange, Bryan Adams, and Michael Kamen, who did the score for the movie. And these guys thought it would be really clever if they got 2 other guys to sing on it with Bryan Adams so that it would be like their own version of the Three Musketeers. So they got Rod Stewart and Sting. And look, some of you might be expecting me to make fun of this song, but how can I when it undeniably rocks? Plus, Bryan Adams, Sting, and Rod Stewart are all badasses in their own right, and together they do it all for love.
Let's make it all fun, all for love.
Okay, let's talk about the movie now. So in rewatching this movie, I was kind of shocked by how early the nostalgia struck me, because the very first note I jotted down when watching this movie was, man, I miss the Caravan Pictures logo. For real though, this movie holds up surprisingly well in some ways, like I talked about Dean Semler's cinematography earlier, but I just want to call it out again here because even this opening shot looks better than anything in modern movies. And if you want an example, just look at this side by side from Freaky Friday versus the upcoming Freakier Friday. My point is that The Three Musketeers looks incredible. This opening sequence with Tim Curry in the dungeon is just flawless. I mean, first of all, it just looks beautiful. And also, this is a real place in Austria called Seegrot. and is actually open to the public, and they have this boat and one of the cell decorations still up for tourists to take photos with. And you know how much I love when movies film in real physical locations. And let's talk about Tim Curry real quick. I mean, one of the best villains of my entire childhood. Cardinal Richelieu, Darkness, and It. And I'm definitely going to do a video on that miniseries soon. I have a lot to say about it. And anyway, Tim Curry is just fantastic in this role, and this opening sequence does a good job of letting us know who the bad guy is right away, and who his right-hand man is, Rochefort, played by another great baddie of my childhood, Michael Wincott, who maybe has the best bad guy voice of all time. I don't know if you guys can think of anyone with a better bad guy voice. If you can, let me know in the comments. But both of these guys are just so great at being bad in this movie. Like, you get the feeling they both genuinely enjoyed being the bad guy. They both even have evil guy mustaches that they could twirl if they wanted to. Okay, let's move on to the proper opening of the movie and our introduction to our main character, D'Artagnan, played by Chris O'Donnell. And this opening duel with him and Gérard sets up a lot for this movie right away. Actually, it's kind of impressive. First of all, French accents and languages other than English, not a thing in this movie. Pretty much everyone just speaks in their native accent, and I really don't think there's a single word not in English in this entire movie. I mean, other than the names of the French cities and whatnot that is in the dialogue. Anyway, the duel also tells us a bit about D'Artagnan right away. He's fairly quick-tempered, he's cocky, he's pretty good with the sword, and all he wants in life is to become a musketeer like his father. And then Gérard informs us that while D'Artagnan's father may have been a musketeer, he still failed to protect the king and died, making many people view him as a disgraceful coward. And anyway, all of this leads to an excellent horse chase through the forest, and I've always loved this little tree platform that they have to run over. I just think it looks cool. The sequence is just great, as is the stuff with D'Artagnan taking out the guys he thinks are bandits, but just end up being the Queen's bodyguard. And we meet Constance, played by Julie Delpy, and I just think this is a nice little meet cute scene. But in between those two sequences, we get the disbanding of the Musketeers, and again, Wincott just seems giddy in the pain he's causing other people. I love it. Like, this is probably the best moment of his entire life, and I love how quickly the entire Musketeer forces just fold and burn their tunics and leave their swords behind. Seems like a pretty big waste of materials to me, but what do I know? However, our three main Musketeers are not here for the disbanding. Nah, they figured something was up and decided to spend their days elsewhere. And alright, let's talk about our Musketeer intros. First up, we meet Kiefer Sutherland as Athos, who's pouting at Musketeer headquarters, which seems kinda ballsy, considering he's got to know that Rochefort is at the very least looking for him. And anyway, D'Artagnan shows up and is an entitled little baby about wanting to become a Musketeer, so Athos challenges him to a duel. Seems a little extreme, but hey, what do I know? I've never been a Musketeer. Next up, we meet Oliver Platt as Porthos. And I gotta say, it makes me a little sad that this is really the only time that Platt got to play a schmoozy, flamboyant ladies man, because he kinda nails it. I mean, I'm no expert on Oliver Platt's career, so if I'm wrong, please let me know, but I genuinely think he's great in this role, and this introductory exchange does a great job of setting up his character, and I still think the Queen of America joke is incredibly funny. So again, D'Artagnan kinda crashes into Porthos and is a little jerk about it, and then Porthos challenges him to a duel, and finally we meet Charlie Sheen as Aramis, and you have to remember this is like a decade plus before Winning and Tiger's Blood and 2.5 Men and just everything else. And anyway, Sheen's also a ladies man in this movie, but a classy, sophisticated one who abuses religion to try and sleep with married women. Okay, he didn't know she was married, but he knew what he was doing. And anyway, this little sequence of him jumping out the window is funny, and then he crashes into D'Artagnan. Kind of nice this one isn't D'Artagnan's fault initially, but he refuses to accept Aramis's apology because again, he's a little baby. So now he's got 3 duels scheduled in one day. But then we get a nice little scene with Curry being creepy as hell towards Queen Anne, played by Gabrielle Anwar, and then the king storms in and yells at him for disbanding the Musketeers, even though the king approved it, which is never really explained. And can anyone tell me why the king seems so scared of the queen? Like, anytime they're in a scene together, he gets so shy and weird. So Richelieu gets mad and yells at Rochefort, leading to a great little interaction between him and our 3 Musketeers, where we get some nice exposition and learn that Rochefort was once a Musketeer before being expelled. And I love Platt's little burn here asking,
Rochefort? Isn't that a smelly kind of a cheese?
But the boys got to get out of here real quick because they've all got duels that afternoon. So they take out Rochefort, first men, and head to their duel. And once they arrive, they're all shocked to learn they're all dueling the same person. And I like how D'Artagnan goes from being a cocky jerk to a total fanboy within the span of like half a second. And the Musketeers are all like, cool, but we're still gonna kill you. And then more of Richelieu's men show up trying to arrest our 3 Musketeers. And this whole exchange is great. Like I said, Platt just absolutely nails this role in the way he says,
Oh, don't be so stupid. Of course we intend to resist. Just give us a moment, all right?
and
Now, we are prepared to resist you.
are just great lines, especially with the latter having the excellent Michael Kamen score begin to swell as they all unsheath their swords. It's just a great little hero moment. I also just have to call out that Sheen and Platt somehow take off their coats to reveal their tunics in perfect unison in this scene. So the entire fight sequence that follows is just really good swashbuckling adventure filmmaking. It's a fun set piece, there are stakes, but not really, and we get to watch our hero have his first victory in front of his new heroes, but they still bail on him anyway, and then D'Artagnan does the dumbest shit ever, and just like announces he's with the Musketeers even though they're gone and tries to charge Rochefort. Some real dumbass behavior if you ask me, because it gets him arrested. And while D'Artagnan is locked up, we get a number of important plot details revealed to us, like the fact that Rochefort has taken D'Artagnan's sword, and we learn it's because D'Artagnan's dad was the one who took Rochefort's eye, and it's heavily implied, though not stated at this point, that Rochefort killed D'Artagnan's father. And anyway, D'Artagnan quickly breaks out of his cell and overhears Richelieu's plans to overthrow the king and take over France, and that he's collaborating with the Duke of Buckingham, and this is where we meet Rebecca de Mornay as Countess de Winter, who's Richelieu's unseen spy lurking in the shadows. But before D'Artagnan can see the spy, Richelieu pretty much immediately catches him and orders him to be executed. And this next part is one of the few things that I bump up against the most in this movie. It just doesn't quite track for me that the Three Musketeers would have found out about D'Artagnan's imprisonment and execution and been able to organize a plan all in the span of what, like 12 hours maybe? But who cares, it's movie magic fun, and I don't like to be a nitpicker, but it's bothered me since I was a kid, so I had to call it out. And anyway, this entire breakout sequence from the execution and subsequent chase is incredible, and maybe the highlight of the entire movie for me. From the way they throw money to the poor people, to the way Kiefer Sutherland hands the reins over so he can drink a bottle of brandy, the whole thing is just a good time right up until they cover it in brandy, set it on fire, and push it into a bunch of explosives. And then we get what is hands down the prettiest shot in the movie. I know I already showed it earlier, but I'm showing it again because it's my video and I can do what I want, and I just love how this shot looks. Next up is our four heroes hanging out in a tavern, and it's a great bonding scene. Porthos and Aramis give D'Artagnan lessons on how to pick up women, and Athos gives him his very sad backstory about how he came to be a musketeer. He was a happily married count who one day discovered a branding on his wife's arm that meant that she was convicted of murder and sentenced to be executed. So he turns her in and then can't live with himself, so he relinquishes everything and becomes a musketeer. And I gotta say, Sutherland's performance here is strong. He delivers this monologue incredibly well. It's so even-tempered, but also just melancholic and sad. Not to play armchair therapist, but I have to imagine he was drawing on a little bit of the pain from Julia Roberts leaving him at the altar just a few years earlier. But then Porthos crashes into the table, ruining this sweet moment, so Athos punches him in the face, and I love this little smile nod thing that Sutherland does here as he takes a drink of wine after punching Porthos. It's just kind of pure alcoholic joy. But then the next day, the boys get attacked by cannonballs and chased by a big group of Richelieu's guys and have to split up. So then we get a nice little scene with D'Artagnan and Athos, who are maybe in the clear for a second and having a nice little chat about D'Artagnan's father, and then they're getting shot at. And Athos sends D'Artagnan onward to finish the mission, and he stays behind to take on the bad guys himself. And we don't see it, but he lives, so I guess he took out all these jerks by himself. Back at the castle, we get a brief moment of the king practicing fencing and confronting Richelieu's creepy ass, but for whatever reason, he just straight up takes Richelieu at his word and is like, cool, nothing sketchy going on here. Thank God his wife isn't an idiot. Shout out to wives. Speaking of idiots, we then cut back to D'Artagnan being the little baby he is, falling asleep and off his horse, only to be picked up by the one person on earth he would hope not to be picked up by, the unseen woman he heard at Richelieu's, who's there to deliver the treaty to the Duke of Buckingham. And she promptly tries to murder him when she figures out who he is and what his mission is. And this is where we get the big reveal. De Winter is in fact Athos's ex-wife. She's not dead, she's working for Richelieu. So De Winter and her boys grab D'Artagnan and they head off to meet their ship, only to find that the entire crew is dead, and Athos, Porthos, and Aramis are there to save the day. So Countess de Winter is arrested and sentenced to be executed, but right before she does, she breaks down and tells Athos everything about Richelieu's plans. I actually really love this exchange between the two of them. Their chemistry is really strong, and I buy all of their emotions that are on display. So now D'Artagnan and our musketeers understand the full scope scope of Richelieu's plan and make a plan of their own to stop it. And this montage sequence we get of all the Musketeers getting notified that they're needed is one of the highlights of the movie for me. I just think the montage we get of all the hidden swords and tunics being broken out is awesome, and it's the exact kind of call to action you want in a movie like this. Plus the score swells here and it just rocks, and it hits that all for love motif. It just, the whole thing rules. Once we get to the king's birthday party where Richelieu has his assassination all planned out, and luckily D'Artagnan makes it up to the assassin just in time to take him out before the assassin can take out the king. Well, kinda. D'Artagnan and him then have a nice long fight after this, and it's pretty sick that it ends with Porthos sniping this dude with a handheld crossbow from like 100 yards away and 100 yards down. I mean, the kind of funny, stupid action that just takes this to the next level for a kid watching it. And there's just a lot of great stuff in this final sequence, like when the Musketeers reveal their tunics, and Kiefer Sutherland yelling, "Save the king!" And that's all before we even get inside the palace. Once we're inside, we get Athos and Rochefort dueling, Charlie Sheen again not doing any sword fighting and getting shot but saved by his cross. So we then get the duel with D'Artagnan and Rochefort after Athos has been stabbed, and it's fantastic. Aside from this weird little flip move that is so clearly a stunt double and not Chris O'Donnell. And you just get the feeling that Wincott is playing Rochefort again as someone who just absolutely loves being evil and being the bad guy. Like the way he kind of smiles and dances around as they duel is something that stuck with me since I was a kid. And even when Rochefort reveals to D'Artagnan that he's the one who killed his father, you just get that he's taking absolute joy in that moment. And I've always loved how Constance slides the sword to D'Artagnan at the perfect moment, and then Rochefort goes from bad guy to dead guy. Then we move on to our final action sequence, our three Musketeers chasing Richelieu down in the dungeons, which I think is a pretty fun set of sequences, and Platt's fight with Ugly has always been a highlight of the movie for me. Also, I just miss when kids movies kind of had these little flourishes of horror like this. My guy gets impaled on metal spikes twice. It's horrifying. And it's always been funny to me that this movie ends again with Aramis in a cloak, faking everyone out and then punching the Cardinal. And that's the end of the Cardinal. He just gets punched into the water, and after that, we don't see him or hear about him again. Then we get our standard epilogue with D'Artagnan finally becoming an official Musketeer, and then him and his boys chasing down Gérard, and we finally get to hear All for Love all the way through as the credits roll. So 32 years later, what is the legacy of Disney's The Three Musketeers? Honestly, it doesn't really have much of one. It's not one I hear people talk about all that often, certainly almost never in the context of being a good movie or an undiscovered gem, and that's kind of a bummer because I think for the most part this movie holds up incredibly well. Like I said earlier, the cinematography alone is the highlight of this movie for me. Every single shot feels so vibrant and real and lived in, and I love the way that Semler uses the lighting in the tavern scenes and especially the dungeon. And again, for the third time, just look how pretty the shot is. I also think the performances are fairly strong across the board. I think all three of our Musketeers have a few lines of dialogue that feel a little too cheesy, or the delivery just kind of feels a little off, but for the most part, I like all three of them. As for what doesn't work for me, the answer is Robin himself, Chris O'Donnell. You really thought I was going to go through this entire video and not mention him as Robin, didn't you? But seriously, I think he's kind of awful in this role. I mean, in his defense, it's not a great written role, but yeah, on this watch, every single time he was on screen, I could not stand him. Maybe it's because I'm an adult now, and he's not really my audience surrogate anymore, but he just annoyed the shit out of me on this watch through. And I'm no Chris O'Donnell hater. I actually think Batman Forever is a pretty solid movie, and he's decent in it. Okay, he's not awful in it. Okay, he's no worse in that movie than he is in this one. But again, overall, I think this movie held up, and for me, it was really nice going back and revisiting a piece of my childhood that at one point meant so much to me that I made my mom make me a tunic. Guys, we weren't even a religious family a little bit, but I wanted to wear that blue tunic with a giant white cross on it so bad. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Was this a childhood favorite for you too? Do you hate this movie? Do you love it? Also, how good is Young Guns? Picture this, the year is 1998 and Titanic has been dominating the box office for 12 full weeks, causing Leonardo DiCaprio's very next movie to have to battle Titanic for attention. And that movie was not only Leo's follow-up to Titanic, but it was also Robert Wallace's follow-up to Braveheart as well. We're talking, of course, about The Man in the Iron Mask, how it came to be, everything that makes it awesome, and its legacy almost 30 years later. And before we go any further, a special thank you to all of my subscribers who voted for this movie to be covered. This is easily one of, if not the most requested movies for me to cover on the channel, and I had a great time revisiting it. The Man in the Iron Mask is not a movie I saw as a kid, though I do remember seeing its trailer constantly as promotion for the movie was ramping up. I'm honestly not sure how I didn't see it as a kid, considering it's got the Three Musketeers in it as main characters, and I was obsessed with Disney's The Three Musketeers from 1993, but I do remember this movie coming out and really wanting to see it, mostly because of Leo, because your boy loved Titanic, and you know what? I'm not ashamed to admit it. But it actually wasn't until 5 or 6 years ago that I watched it for the first time, and I kind of feel like this is a lost movie of my childhood. I think if I would have seen this movie before the age of 10, I'd probably hold it in the same regard as Disney's The Three Musketeers movie. But I have to confess something that might make a few of you mad. When I first watched this movie, I didn't really like it. I thought it was too slow, I thought the script was sloppy, and I thought most of the actors in it had been incredibly miscast. But before you turn the video off, when I rewatched the movie in preparation for making this video, I kind of completely changed my mind. Don't get me wrong. This movie could have used a ruthless editor and been cut down to an excellent 100-minute movie, but as it is, it's still incredibly watchable in 2025. First of all, we just don't really get movies like this anymore. I know there was that two-parter Three Musketeers movie that came out of France a few years ago, which I did actually watch after you all were very loud about it in the comments of my Three Musketeers video, but for the most part, these types of period piece adventure movies are just not in style anymore. But my God, does this movie look incredible, from its beautiful sets to capturing the beauty of actual period-built French castles and estates. Even the most basic dialogue scenes are just beautifully shot. Okay, now let's dive into how 1998's The Man in the Iron Mask came to be. Obviously, the beginnings of this movie stretch all the way back to the mid-19th century, and author Alexandre Dumas' stories about D'Artagnan and the Three Musketeers, with this film taking particular inspiration from the final section of the D'Artagnan romances series. However, the rough plot of replacing King Louis XIV with his secret twin brother Philippe, aka the Man in the Iron Mask, is really the only plot thread from the original novel that remains in this adaptation. Much like the Three Musketeers adaptation that Disney made in 1993, The Man in the Iron Mask really ignores a lot of the larger plot elements in favor of something that captures the swashbuckling and dramatic tone of the original novel. Although this movie is obviously a lot sillier and more adult than Disney's Musketeers film. And in 1995, Randall Wallace entered the scene with the script for Braveheart, which would go on to make over $200 million against its reported $53 million budget. So Wallace was a hot commodity in the mid-90s. It was actually MGM that approached Wallace about adapting Dumas' work for the screen, and after the success of Braveheart, Wallace was panicking a bit about what he'd do next in his career, wanting to make sure that Braveheart wasn't the only piece of work he'd be known for, which is exactly what attracted him to the story of The Man in the Iron Mask, following these older men who'd accomplished great things in their lives as young men, but struggling with a sense of irrelevance as they grew older. So Wallace sat down and wrote a screenplay that captured the adventure of the novel, while also working through his own existential dread of irrelevance, and shockingly, the studio loved the script and even approved Randall Wallace to direct, giving him a budget of $35 million, which would be about $70.4 million today, adjusted for inflation. As for the casting process of the movie, one thing that Wallace has said is that he doesn't write with any specific actors in mind, or rather, if he does, he's never convinced that they're the only person that could play that role, which I have to imagine made casting quite easy for this movie. It sounds like Jeremy Irons, John Malkovich, Gérard, Depardieu, and Gabriel Byrne all immediately had qualities that Wallace was looking for when he met with them. And I do think it's kind of fun that all four of the Musketeers in this movie are played by actors of completely different nationalities. Irons is English, Malkovich is American, Depardieu is French, and Byrne is Irish. As for the titular Man in the Iron Mask, I couldn't find any other information about other actors considered for the role, but I did find a funny story from Randall Wallace who was talking about Leo and the success of Titanic. Because you see, when casting for Man in the Iron Mask was underway, Titanic had not been released yet. And one thing that history has made all of us forget is that before Titanic was released, the entire industry was convinced that it was going to be the most expensive flop in Hollywood history. So when Randall Wallace cast Leonardo DiCaprio, he wasn't casting the star of the biggest movie on the planet. He was casting the 22-year-old actor who'd been working in Hollywood for over 5 years already. Filming for The Man in the Iron Mask began on April 28th, 1997, and filming was done entirely entirely in France, spread across several sound stages, as well as some actual French castles from the 17th century. The production designer, Anthony Pratt, and his team built 15 different sets for the movie, including building waterways for the 2 separate prison break sequences in the movie and King Louis XIV's massive and grand palace in Versailles. The French government did actually offer the production of The Man in the Iron Mask the chance to film at the actual palace, but the rule was they couldn't change anything or bring in any equipment, including lights. And that just wasn't going to work for the production of this movie. And honestly, it worked out for the best because the actual palace in Versailles has been standing for hundreds of years, so to recreate the palace on a soundstage allowed the team to create something that would look as fresh as the palace would have looked during King Louis's reign. Filming completed that August, and I couldn't really find any information about the post-production process, sadly, and on March 13th, 1998, The Man in the Iron Mask was released into theaters where it made $17.2 million and was number 2 at the box office behind Titanic, which was in its 12th week of release and in the middle of its 15-week run at the top of the US box office. And against its $35 million budget, The Man in the Iron Mask would go on to make a worldwide total of $182.9 million, making it an objective success for both Randall Wallace and MGM Studios. While The Man in the Iron Mask may have been a hit at the box office, it was not a hit with critics, with most of them pointing to its slow pacing and lack of romance as the main problems, but all agreeing that it was a visually engaging film. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time that we dive deep into 1998's The Man in the Iron Mask and everything that makes it awesome. But before we go any further, here is your one and only spoiler warning for a movie that's nearly 30 years old. The Man in the Iron Mask begins with Jeremy Irons giving us a little voiceover about the historical events the movie is based on. Well, sort of. The only thing this movie cops to is the fact that there was a prisoner during Louis XIV's reign whose imprisonment was kept secretive and the prisoner was masked. And if you want to break down on the historical inaccuracies of this movie, I highly recommend the video history buffs put out on this movie a couple of years ago. So we get Jeremy Irons' voiceover and then a quick tracking shot through a prison as we see someone deliver food to a cell, only for it to be revealed that the prisoner is wearing an iron mask. We're then very quickly introduced to Gabriel Byrne as D'Artagnan, Jeremy Irons as Aramis, and Gérard Depardieu as Porthos. And one thing I find really interesting about this movie is that it kind of expects you to have passing familiarity with these characters. Like, I watched this movie with my wife, and she found the first 20 minutes of this movie overwhelming because the movie is just constantly introducing characters who all kind of look the same and expecting you to know and understand the difference between every single character. Even though I find the beginning of this movie a little clunky, I do really love the introduction of Porthos and Aramis. First of all, I love that Porthos is dressed so flamboyantly throughout this movie. His costumes are as loud as he is. And I think it's hilarious that his introduction is him bringing women to Aramis only to find him praying and the two getting into a fight over Aramis being no fun anymore. When D'Artagnan shows up, we get a bit of exposition about King Louis XIV and his treatment of the people and how the people feel about him as king. We then are introduced to John Malkovich as Athos and Peter Sarsgaard as his son Raoul. And I just have to say that even though I think Malkovich is a great actor and he does the best job possible with the material in this movie, I do feel he was incredibly miscast in the role of Athos. Honestly, all of the American actors feel a little out of place in this movie. Maybe it's because everyone else has on either English or French or Irish accents, but the American accents just kind of jump out at me in this movie. Okay, that being said, the introduction of Athos and Raoul is very sweet and well written. We learn that Raoul is to propose to his girlfriend, Christine, and that the ring Athos has given him was his wife's ring, who died giving birth to Raoul. The whole scene just does a great job of setting up how much Athos and Raoul care for one another, and that for Athos, Raoul is all he has in this world anymore. He's left the Musketeers and is retired. It's then time for our introduction of Leo as King Louis XIV, and for my money, this is where cinematographer Peter Sashitsky's work really begins to shine through. And if you don't know the name Peter Sashitsky, he shot a couple of other movies you might have heard of, like The Rocky Horror Picture Show, Dead Ringers, and this little movie called The Empire Strikes Back. I don't know, I've never heard of it. I feel like anytime we're in the palace, I can just hit pause on any random frame and get something that vaguely resembles a Baroque era painting. Once we're introduced to Leo as the king, we're also introduced to his arrogance and ignorance of how the world works, with his advisor, Dr. House here, telling him that the people of Paris are rioting, to which Louis says,
"But Paris is the most beautiful city in the world."
Which is just hilarious out-of-touch rich people shit to say in a movie. So, like an evil, out-of-touch rich person, he orders rotten food distributed to the people because at least it's food. Aramis then quickly enters the picture, and the full story of the movie begins to become more in focus. We learn that there is a secret Jesuit order out to kill the king, and the king is officially asking Aramis to discover who the leader is and kill them. More on that in a bit. So the king then moves on to his extravagant garden party that he's throwing, that both Raoul and his soon-to-be fiancée, Christine, are attending. Unfortunately, Christine catches Louis's eye and he becomes immediately obsessed with her. So much so that he goes through great lengths to isolate her from Raoul and the rest of the party in general. And just a quick little plot convenience thing I have to make fun of. How did Louis know that she would be the last one down the stairs and that his plans with the fountain would work? Alright, so as King Louis tries and is failing miserably to woo Christine, he's almost murdered by a Jesuit assassin. But luckily, D'Artagnan and his CGI sword are there to save the day. Now that Christine has the king's eye, he quickly hatches a plan to remove Raoul from her life so that he can have her all to himself. And that plan is simply sending Raoul to the front line of the war against the Dutch, essentially sentencing him to death. The scene between Malkovich and Byrne upon Raoul revealing this information is just excellent as well. Like I said, I think Malkovich was a little miscast, but luckily he's still one of the greatest actors of all time because I fully buy that he feels absolutely betrayed by D'Artagnan in this moment. That D'Artagnan would back up a corrupt, selfish, childish king over his closest friends absolutely breaks Athos and infuriates him. In D'Artagnan's defense, right after the scene, he does stop a group of rioters promising to speak to the king about the food. And when he does, he also brings up Raoul and Christine and asks him if he doesn't already have enough women. He tries his best to convince Louis that what he's doing is wrong, and it kinda works. He does immediately fire Dr. House for distributing rotten food, even though that was Louis's order to him. But as far as Raoul and Christine go, he can't help himself and he moves forward with that plan. I really like the conversation between Louis and D'Artagnan though. It feels like a father talking to his son, and I really like how Byrne plays it. It's very soft and sensitive, not angry. He approaches every conversation with the king with love, and I do believe that Louis loves D'Artagnan back, even though he has no inkling of an idea that D'Artagnan is his father, but more on that in just a bit. Following this, Raoul is quickly killed in battle, and upon discovering this, Athos storms the gate to the palace and fights off half a dozen musketeers in his quest to kill the king before D'Artagnan stops him and calms him down. But it is very clear that this is not over. With Raoul out of the way, Louis invites Christine to the palace to live with him and quickly begins systematically gaslighting her and telling her he didn't cause Raoul's death. And damn, look how pretty this dining room set piece is. I really love the use of red here. That night, Aramis calls a meeting between him, Athos, Porthos, and D'Artagnan, in which he reveals to his friends that he is in fact the leader of the Jesuit order trying to assassinate the king, and he has a plan to remove Louis from the throne and replace him. D'Artagnan throws a little fit because he's still loyal to the king, but he doesn't ever tell anyone else about this meeting, and he knows just how capable his friends are, so I want to believe that deep down, D'Artagnan knows that they're doing the right thing. The next morning, Louis actually scolds D'Artagnan for not killing Athos upon his storming of the castle, and is furious that Athos, Aramis, and Porthos are nowhere to be found around the city. He doesn't know anything, but he does suspect that something is up. The prison breakout scene that follows is absolutely fantastic, with Aramis disguising himself as a fat old priest to visit with the prisoner and give confession. And the idea that Aramis is carrying a corpse on him as he enters the prison is insane and such a cool prison break idea. And I like how he tricks the guards into burning the body so that it can't be identified. Now that they've successfully broken the prisoner out, it's time to remove the mask and find out who he is, and it's revealed that he is the king's twin brother, Philippe. King Louis XIII had ordered Philippe hidden away, fearing that the two brothers would tear the country apart, with each vying for power and wanting to be king. It's also revealed that Aramis was a crucial member of this secret plan, something he never revealed to his friends before, and he asks Philippe for his forgiveness. Our musketeers then sit down with Philippe and explain to him their plan, and I really like that they don't force him into the plan. They present it and ask if he'll help them. While our three musketeers and Philippe hide out in the country, we cut back to the palace to see that Louis and his mother have been informed of Philippe's supposed death, and I really like this shot of Louis trying on the burnt iron mask only to recoil immediately. There's also this great great scene between D'Artagnan and Anne where it's fully revealed that these two are in love and had an affair that led to the births of Louis and Philippe, and that D'Artagnan had never been told of the existence of Philippe, and these two just have fantastic chemistry in the scene. It does a great job of showing the secret relationship that exists between the two of them. We then cut back to the farm for probably the funniest scene in the movie. Porthos is trying to hook up with a woman in the hay. No, two women. Wait, 3 women? But unfortunately, at this point, Porthos seems to be impotent and decides to just unalive himself. And the way that Aramis and Athos react to this is hilarious. Aramis doesn't really pay it much mind when he sees Porthos walking towards the barn completely naked, but not letting himself get distracted. Athos, on the other hand, tries to run out and stop Porthos, but it's revealed that Aramis had sawed the beam earlier in the day, so when Porthos goes to jump, he ends up just taking the entire barn down with him. Finally, Philippe agrees to help the Musketeers, and we get an excellent training sequence montage that sees Philippe learning how to fight, learning proper manners, and learning how to dance. It's then time for our heroes to put their plan into action at a masquerade ball that Louis is throwing. So the Musketeers and Philippe make their way inside the palace, each also carrying an iron mask which they use to shock Louis into retiring to his bedroom for a moment of peace. This is where they swap in Philippe, and they really do almost get away with it. Philippe is sitting in his throne, and the Musketeers have Louis bagged and are leading him out of the castle. Unfortunately, Philippe just cannot help his good nature, and D'Artagnan quickly realizes that he is not Louis and is in fact Philippe. So he races with Philippe to the dungeon to stop the Musketeers from taking Louis away. And this is such a tense little standoff, and sadly it ends with Louis back on the throne, Philippe in chains, and the Musketeers feeling like they failed. Immediately, Louis orders Philippe to be put back in the mask and put back into prison, which prompts D'Artagnan to finally take action and side with his friends. He leaves a note for his boys telling them where Philippe is being held, and even though they're pretty positive it's a trap, they throw on their Musketeer uniforms, finally. And this second prison break scene is just excellent from start to finish, with the prison being slowly surrounded and infiltrated by Louis and the other Musketeers. And I love that the main plot point here is that the Musketeers have all been so inspired by and look up to the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan as legends that they all refuse to let themselves be the one to kill them. There's even this great shot of all 4 Musketeers and Philippe emerging from the gunsmoke after being shot at, and they're all completely unscathed, and it just straight up rocks. Once the men make it very clear that they won't be killing the Musketeers, Louis takes matters into his own hands and tries to stab Philippe, only for D'Artagnan to throw himself in front of the knife, and before he dies he tells Philippe how proud he is of him and lets out one final
All for one. One.
before dying. Louis is then locked away in prison in an iron mask, but only briefly because Philippe is not the cruel king that Louis was, and he instead orders Louis to live out his life on a secluded farm. It ends with a little blurb about how Louis XIV would go on to become one of France's greatest kings. So, nearly 30 years later, what is the legacy of the man in the iron mask? Well, I think it's kind of a forgotten movie at this point. It's not one you really hear people talk about very often. I think there's a couple reasons for that. The main reason is, well, Titanic. This movie, even though it came out after Titanic was released, was still quite literally in the shadow of Titanic. It couldn't even overtake it for the #1 spot at the box office on its opening weekend. The other reason I think this movie isn't talked about so much is that it's a little bit of a mess. Like I said, I quite liked rewatching this movie and had a really good time with it, but the whole time I was watching it, I was noticing shots and entire scenes that could have been cut to give this movie a fast pace and made it just that much more exciting. That being said, the movie looks immaculate. Both Robert Wallace and cinematographer Peter Sashitsky absolutely nailed the look of this movie, and I think a big part of that was their decision to film entirely in France. The Man in the Iron Mask may not be a perfect movie, but if you put it on, I guarantee you're going to have a blast watching it. And there are always Musketeer movies being made, but I feel like this was the last big budget Musketeer movie to have any real success at the box office. Well, the US box office. I have no idea if those French Musketeer movies from a few years ago were hits there or not. If you've made it this far into the compilation video, thank you for watching, especially if you had watched either of these videos before. It truly means the world. And as always, a very special thank you to my supporters on Patreon who help keep things running over here on Born to Rant. There's a link to the Patreon in the description below if you'd like to learn more. Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, so if you could like the video and or subscribe to the channel, it would really help me out. We release new videos every week covering all of your favorite movies and TV shows from the 90s and 2000s. And that's going to do it for Born to Rant this week. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.